Mr. Forth, the Hayward County Party chairs here. And also let me thank Mr. Jimmy for allowing us to use this space. And basically, I just wanted to get together to introduce myself and hear what your thoughts are and maybe answer any questions you might have about me. But so I'm running for governor and as a Democrat. And my background is I came to Nashville in 1978 to go to Vanderbilt Law School. And so your story is similar to mine. I got to law school and met a woman in law school after about a year, and she is a Nashville native, and we kind of discussed where we should live, and so since she's from Nashville, I live in Nashville, and it's been a great place to live, a great place to raise a family. I got 3 kids, 2 who will be completing college this year, and 1 who's a lawyer in Nashville, and my wife and I had our first grandchild on Valentine's Day. A little girl, so that has been great. I worked as I got out of law school, I worked as a public defender for 16 years, and part of that time, or the majority of that time, I was the elected public defender for Nashville. I was elected in 1990, re-elected in 94 and 98. And in 1999, when Bill Purcell was mayor, he asked me to leave the public defender's office and be the city's lawyer. And so I became the director of law, and I did that up till 2007, when I resigned to run for mayor. And I kind of started out as a real underdog because I wasn't, public defender, director of law, not exactly household names, and had to work hard, but I won, and I had 2 really different terms. My first term, which was from 07 to 11, was we had 2 big crises. We had the Great Recession, which started in 2008, which was a real challenge to sort of manage our way through. We had to make a lot of budget cuts in order to balance the budget. But I didn't cut education, I didn't cut public safety, and we kept working on economic development. It was during that time period that we made the investment to build the new convention center, which resulted in a bunch of hotels and expansion of the Country Music Hall of Fame and some other things that made the city much more attractive for tourism and hospitality. And then, of course, in May of 2010, we had the flood in Nashville, where we had about $2 billion in private property damage and had 11 of our citizens die. And just to put that in context, though, it was a terrible thing to go through, and it was a real economic challenge for the city. But in Nashville's flood, we had, in 36 hours, we had about 14 inches of rain. And just this past few weeks, Houston and their flood had, in 36 hours, got 51 inches of rain, plus a storm surge. So there was a much more dramatic event there. But the city recovered from that, and I always say the study of the reason for Nashville's success during the flood was the citizens. Everybody stepped up and volunteered. They helped each other, helped strangers. We had really good efforts by churches and companies and nonprofits, and we got back up on our feet pretty quick. And so by the end of my first term, though, after going through some real challenges, a lot of the things that we had tried to do with economic development, whether it's a convention center or business recruitment, started paying off, and the city just started the boom that we're still in the midst of. It's when the TV show Nashville came on, and the New York Times called us the It City, and all that started happening. So in my second term, it was mainly dealing with the growing economy, dealing with trying to create more jobs, but it was a little more pleasant than the first term. So when I left office, we have term limits. When I left office in 2015, I was thinking about running for governor, and I had to make a decision, and I kind of narrowed it down to three things I had to decide. One was whether I had something to contribute, and I think that I care very much about education. I care a lot about economic development, and so I think I have something to contribute. And then I had to make sure my family was on board to do this, and You know, the 3 kids are, my wife's on board, and I interpret my grandchild's gurgling as being her endorsement. And then I had to determine whether there's a pathway to win, which I think is significant. I mean, I think if you do this, you want to, there are no guarantees in life, but you want to make sure that there's a way to get it done. And I'm convinced that, you know, the people of Tennessee want a governor who's going to be pragmatic, have common sense, not going to be an ideologue, somebody who's going to try to get things done that really matter to people. And to me, the big issues, I think, facing the state are public education. Long term, I think it's a game changer for Tennessee that, you know, we have to continue to improve. We've had, you know, Governor Bredesen and Governor Haslam have both done a lot to move the state forward, but, you know, we're still like in the 40s when it comes to ranking by state, and we need to be in the top half at the very least. And so to me, that we need to do a couple things. We need to continue to be committed to having more of our young people go to college. We need to be sure that those who choose not to go to college have access to good vocational training, technical training, apprenticeships where they can get good jobs. I think we need to do something with teacher pay. I think we're, you know, compared to a lot of states, we're $8,000 or $10,000 behind. And I think a lot of different school districts in the state are really confronting challenges in being able to recruit teachers, particularly in math and science and special ed, where you need to have really quality people, and you want to retain them when you get them. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed. Then the next thing I would say that is important is economic opportunity development. We need to be creating more jobs. We need to be, I think, working hard to make sure that we're growing the private sector economy so that all areas of the state are prospering. And you can look at around the state, Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville are doing really well, but we want to make sure that every part of the state is doing well. And so when I look at rural Tennessee, small town Tennessee, large parts of West Tennessee, we need to be putting more of an emphasis on bringing jobs to those areas. I think we need to work with each area of the state, with each county, to see what their strengths are and try to play to their strengths. But at the same time, I mean, I think we just need to set a priorities that we're going to do more in these areas that are hurting. I mean, we're all in this together. It's one state. Every part of the state should prosper. I mean, that's the type of work I did in Nashville, and I would really like to see us do it on a statewide basis. And then lastly, I would mention healthcare. You know, I think healthcare is on everybody's minds. I think the state made a huge mistake when it didn't do Medicaid expansion. When you stop and think about that, we have lost about $3.5 billion over the past years because we didn't do the Medicaid expansion. And what that means is that you know, the money that could have come to Tennessee if we had done it has gone to other states that did the expansion. And that money is not being saved, you know, for us. That money has been spent in other states, and that money includes our own tax dollars. So because we didn't do it, people with who are impoverished, people who have disabilities, people with special needs or pre-existing conditions are not getting access to insurance that they need. And as a result of that, it makes the hospital situation in Tennessee very unstable. I mean, that's why Tennessee as a state has the second most hospital closures in any state in the country. Only Texas has more than us. We have 9. And so if you go back to this, you know how that affects the community because you've all been through this. I mean, if you have a child who breaks his or her leg, or somebody gets appendicitis, somebody has a heart attack, I mean, you're half an hour or more away from a hospital. But it also affects you in terms of economics, in that if you're trying to get business or trying to recruit jobs to the county, and you don't have a hospital, that makes it, you know, 3 times as difficult to get that done. So I think going forward, I mean, you know, clearly we should, if available, we should do the Medicaid expansion, or we should look for ways where we can get our fair share of Medicaid dollars. We're putting ourselves at a real disadvantage. You know, overall, I would say that I have, you know, great confidence about the state's future. I mean, it's a beautiful place. It's, you know, been to one end to the other. It's very diverse. The geography is diverse. Wonderful, friendly people here. I think we got, you know, great business climate. I think we benefit from having a growing consensus in the state that education is our primary thing we need to get right. But I think if we pay attention to the fundamentals, which to me are education, jobs, and healthcare, that, you know, we'll be in good shape. And I think that's how the race gets won, is that you talk about the issues that really matter to people, you look for solutions, you don't look to divide people, and you try to use state government to improve people's lives. And I think that's a compelling message. I'd be happy to answer questions if you all have some. Yep.
How do you feel about the mega site that's here?
I think we need to work hard to put something on that mega site. You know, I mean, clearly, you know, there's been a lot of investment made in that site. It would be a great thing for this area to locate a major company there, and I think that can be done. You know, I know Governor Haslam is working on it, and I'm sure it's a high priority for him. But if that does not happen, it would be one of the highest priorities for me. I think you've got to, again, in areas that really need the help, we need to make that a priority. When you look around the state, you know, clearly this is a site where we should be putting a lot of effort to bring in a business there that will jumpstart the economy here. You know, I think that's related, of course, to the hospital issue. You know, hopefully that if you solve one, you solve the other. But it would be something that would be at the very top of my list of things to do.
I'm from Tipton County. I'm with my chairman here from the Democratic Party in Tipton County, and she asked me to ride with her over here. But I'm also on the city council in Cumming.
Yeah. And I think it ties into the whole, it ties into education too, because one of the things you hear the most about is, you know, we have to have workforce ready people, have people here who can fill the jobs. And, you know, I met with the school superintendent this afternoon. I know they're working hard on doing a curriculum. We're having vocational training that will fit into jobs that could become available. I think that's the right approach.
My wife is a teacher.
Yeah.
She taught in Haywood County for 13 years, though now she works in a suburb of Memphis. She was always really good at dealing with the unique challenges you get in a county with a high poverty rate, but it got too much. You know, she needed a break. So now, where she is, she's earning more money because it's Shelby County, and it's a job that she loves. Whereas here, it was much less money, and it was a job that was wearing her down. And I see this as linked to economically the fleeing of the tax base from rural towns, and then also similar to what you get in a city. And I'm worried that and this, I'm sure this is not just Tennessee but everywhere, we're going to get to a point where the only safe, prosperous places to live are like suburbs of big towns, like big urban centers. How can we keep this downward spiral from going on?
Yeah, well, there's been certainly in the U.S. a long-term trend of people moving from rural areas into more urban areas, and that has continued. And whether the urban core or the suburbs are benefiting the most, you know, people could debate. But I do agree with sort of the premise of your question. I think it's vital to Tennessee, with our strong agricultural economy, and with the sort of the backbone that the rural areas and the small towns provide for the state, that we do all that we can to make sure that those communities stay viable and actually thrive. And so to me, I think for an area to thrive, you've got to have a strong private sector economy that's producing jobs, creating opportunities, and creating a tax base. And so that's why I would say that in terms of economic development, that we place the emphasis on looking at ways in which we can benefit those areas the most, because they're the ones who are most challenged. I'm not saying you stop doing things in the cities. I mean, ultimately the decision where a company relocates to or where they invest is that company's decision. But you do have some influence that you can bring to bear in terms of what you can do to encourage them to look at other areas. I also think it's important to look at the strengths that each area has, and probably the best people to identify those strengths are the people who are the residents of those counties. I mean, you could look at the Upper Cumberland. There are some counties there that have gone through some tough economic times, and they can do some really, really interesting things with outdoor sports. I mean, hiking, rock climbing, rafting, or whatever. I think we need to look at ways we can encourage the downtown areas or the Court Square areas of small towns to stay viable. I mean, I know there are some grants that are given, not nearly enough in my mind.
Yeah.
I think, and when you think about it, when the town does well and there are jobs there, that helps the farms too, because it gives everybody another source of potential income. And creates a stronger community. But I think that just needs to be a major focus of economic development. It's a rural and small town.
Yeah, thank you.
I have two questions. As a Democratic Party chair, my concern is the Republican stronghold that we have here in Tennessee.
Right.
And if
My
you-
concern too.
Great. So if you do win the primary, how helpful will that be, do you think, with Democrats, other Democrats who are running for office? We need help.
No, I think clearly, one of the things that I think has hurt Democrats in the past couple election cycles has been that we have not had competitive races for some of the statewide positions where we haven't put up candidates. And if you just don't do it, that's going to drive fewer people to the polls. And then just to reverse that though, I would say from a candidate who is running on a statewide basis, you want to see a lot of candidates in the legislative districts because they're going to excite their own sort of grassroots efforts to get the voters out. And we need to be doing both. And so I think where the Republicans have sort of changed the equation on Democrats over the last 10, 12 years, in particular, has been, they fielded candidates in almost every election, and they fielded strong candidates in statewide elections, which has, which helps them. It builds their party, and we haven't been in that position. We haven't been building the party, which we need to do. So it would be great if every officer is a Democrat running, and I think people work together to try to get the best result we can, and this could be a very interesting year or 2018 could be a really interesting year for Democrats.
My second question is economic development across Tennessee seems to have been centralized in middle and up and east. West Tennessee has not fared as well. I did hear you say that you are concerned about economic development all across the state.
Right.
So tell me what specifically can West Tennessee
Right.
benefit?
I think there's all sorts of economic development. There's sort of the glamour things that get everybody's attention in the newspaper, and they're real projects, and some of them pan out and some of them don't. And then there are smaller projects that may be 100 or 50 to 100 employees, and then sort of medium-sized ones that might be a couple hundred. In what I think we need to do in economic development is sort of place our resources and our emphasis on the areas that need the help the most. Ultimately, the decision as to where a company is going to locate is going to be the company's decision. You can't force them to go anywhere. But you can try to persuade them, try to make it appealing to them to locate in an area where the jobs are really needed, where there is a lack of jobs or a lack of tax base. And that's what I would do. I can tell you I have spent a lot of time in West Tennessee in the past few months, and I should start counting this, and maybe someone can give me keep track of this. But I hear anywhere I go in West Tennessee, hear a lot in Memphis, that people feel forgotten. They feel that state government has not paid attention to them. They feel that they haven't, their concerns aren't being heard. And I think we got to make an effort to change that. You know, and ultimately, I wouldn't, you know, I know we have the 3 grand divisions, but ultimately, it is one state. We all pay taxes to the same state government, and it's the same revenue that gets spread around. And we got to look at this like we're all in this together. And so it is good for Middle Tennessee if West Tennessee prospers. It's good for East Tennessee if West Tennessee prospers, and vice versa. I mean, it's good for West Tennessee when if other parts of the state are doing well. But we got to look out for each other. And so if there are areas that are hurting, those are the areas that need the focus.
I just want to echo what she said about, and what you said about how we feel forgotten. You know, it's not every day, but it's just so many times in the paper something goes, and I work for the state in economic and community development, and I was the chamber director here for 10 years, so it seems like, you know, I know what's out there that can be available to encourage a company to come on to the community. And you're right, I mean, it's their decision, bottom line is their decision. But it seems, it appears, for so many years, that more money was out there always in Middle Tennessee and East Tennessee than for West Tennessee, outside of Memphis or Jackson. They seem to fare always better, and I understand all of that. But at some point, you know, Nashville has to really look at rural West Tennessee.
I mean, the state government.
State, well, you was going to say Nashville, I mean, state government. The governor has to look at what's happening, and it's critical. I mean, everything we talked about, healthcare, education, you know, it's all tied to some degree to jobs.
Right.
And what's available in the community for people to make their living.
I mean, I'll just give you an example, and this is just goes back to my experience as mayor. I mean, Nashville's a little different than most places because it's a consolidated government, and it's 503 square miles. And so when you're mayor, you got, you know, we're doing economic development, and we may be getting, whether it's a store, or whether it's a office building, or whatever it is going to be put somewhere in the county because that business has decided that's what they want to do. Now, you know, when I first became mayor, there was a part of the city, southern part of it, Antioch area, which had not had a lot of business, had not had a lot of new stuff happen there. And of course, they felt forgotten. And I think, you know, part of it was, I think as a city, we had not put enough resources in there in terms of parks and libraries and things like that to help make it a more attractive place to be. But we also hadn't really tried that hard to market it. And so when I was mayor, I made a concerted effort to make a lot more investments there. And we did a deal with the Predators where we built an ice rink. We turned the mall into a community center, a park facility for exercise, a beautiful library. And then we worked with businesses that were interested in Nashville. We, you know, encouraged them to look at this area, and they started coming. And now they're that's where they're going. And for instance, what's the company everybody wants and loves? IKEA is going in that area, and we got a big healthcare company went in that area. But I think what it is you just got to set your priorities, be deliberate about what you're doing. You don't want to overpromise that you can turn it around overnight, but you've got to say, if this area isn't doing well, and it's part of our state, and these are our people, and we want you to succeed, because when you do better, everybody does better, that we get it done. And that's how I would approach it. And definitely pledge that you wouldn't, if I'm governor, you wouldn't feel forgotten. I mean, I might get on your nerves, might bug you too much if I was around, but you wouldn't feel forgotten.
I think something that hurts Democrats a lot in a state government is that we get tied to the national Democratic brand a lot, which doesn't help in a conservative state. So what areas do you feel you can compromise on, you can work with the what I assume is still going to be a heavily Republican state legislature next year? Where can you
Don't
negotiate
assume
and compromise? Well, I'll be hopeful.
Don't
but,
assume we tried.
Yeah. So for you personally, as opposed to any other Democrat, where do you feel like you can compromise, or there's room for that? And then what are your non-negotiables? Like where can you put your foot down, whether it's, like you said, paying teachers more, or whatever it is?
Well, I mean, here's my approach, and again, it goes back to what I said about where I think my background as a mayor and trying to actually do things and to move the city forward is you try to seek agreement on basic principles. And I think there are, like, for instance, the state is certainly facing an opioid crisis. And I would think that is an area that is just ripe for bipartisan agreement on what to do. I mean, certainly we all would agree that it is a crisis. I think most people would agree that having more preventative educational efforts to make sure people understand the dangers of these drugs.
Medicinal marijuana.
Well, let me finish with opioids before we jump to marijuana.
But it's tied in because some people are seeing it as a possible treatment.
People consider.
Right.
So,
But I think, and we could agree that we need more treatment, which has healthcare ramifications, because I think part of our problem is, we don't have the treatment facilities and hospitals available because of the lack of Medicaid expansion. And I think we can agree that there ought to be more done to make sure that we're not overprescribing or have too many opioids floating around everywhere. And there's a law enforcement function. Now, there may be details that people would disagree here and there on, but I think that would be something where I think you could broadly construct a response. And I'd be hopeful that even before this election, that the legislature and the governor's office next year will be able to do something. I can't see why they wouldn't be able to.
yeah.
All right, but then take a more complicated issue. Let's take education. I think you start from the premise, and I think this is a good thing for Tennessee, that there's this growing consensus that education is the key thing for us moving forward. I think you come into it with an open mind, how you accomplish that. You work with people to move that issue along. You might not get everything you want, but you may get a good portion of it. But you gotta talk to each other to get it done. I think it gets more complicated with healthcare. But again, I would say that people are starting to figure out that, when you have 9 hospitals closed, when we're losing $3.5 billion, and you can just go over the border and look at Kentucky, who did the expansion, and they're going to have a more robust, good health insurance environment than we have, and healthier hospitals. I think people will start working for a common solution. So I think you've got to start with the idea that you're going to look for common ground and try to work your issues out. And to me, in terms of this campaign, I think what you want to do is focus on the things that the state can really do to make a difference in people's lives. We can do something about education. We can do something about jobs. We can do something about healthcare. Those are real things that state government, whether it's the governor or the legislature, can actually accomplish things and move the ball. And so I think it's trying to focus on those things that we really can accomplish is the key.
Yeah, no, that sounds great, because even though I identify as very traditionally left-wing, I want a Democrat that can win. And you have to look at the state that we're in. Obviously, the average candidate from California won't win in Tennessee.
Well, let me give you another example. I mean, because I get asked this question a lot. And so if you're elected governor and you have a Republican majority still, and whether it's a super majority or not, you still have a Republican majority. What do you do? Well, remember, when Lamar Alexander was governor of Tennessee, he dealt with the Democratic legislature. And I think most people would think that he was a successful governor. When Phil Bredesen in his second term had to deal with the emergence of the Republican majority. I think most people believe, I certainly believe, that Phil Bredesen was a great governor. You can look around the country. At any given time, there are states with the governor of one party and a legislature of another. The two governors you hear a lot about in terms of national press are the governor of Montana, who's a Democrat, who's a very conservative Republican legislature, and they're getting things done. The governor of Massachusetts is a Republican, and he's got a very Democratic legislature, and they're getting things done. So I'm a big believer in a functioning two-party system and sort of having a balance to politics.
Yes.
I mean, I think it gets out of whack when you don't have more of a balance than what
Right.
we have in Tennessee.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Do you think the way we